Well, that took me a little while to figure out that I was muted. Sorry about that. I was looking for my screen share button and apparently I wasn't available to me. So, hey, thanks everyone for joining us today. Happy to have you with us. You may periodically hear folks jump on and off this Zoom. It sounds like a doorbell, so just know it probably isn't yours. Thanks again for joining us. If you don't have the agenda in front of you, it is in the chat box. And we'll go ahead and get started with a quick video. This is something David shared with us. I will try to play it. Hopefully you all will hear it. Trish Payne, I see your mug in the window. Let me know if you can hear it with a thumbs up, okay? So close. I absolutely love that video. I'd seen it for the first time this morning, and it reminds me of the effects of great coaching, right? And the determination of a youngster, and really how that's our work every day, really just trying to always get better, take the feedback, and constantly improving to hit the mark. So, all right. Trish Payne, can you still hear me? Terrific, all right. I'm gonna go ahead and break into the next set of materials. And I wanna share with you that you'll notice that that link takes you to our web page. And if you, under Family and Educator Partnership, or also known as FEP, and if you scroll clear down to the bottom, there's additional resources there. And I wanted to bring your attention to this particular link called Universal Tier Materials. I believe don't know why it's slow. There we go. So there is a folder here, and I'm, whoops. If you look at down this list, you will find lots of resources that are shared by the FEP group. And you might be asking yourself, why would I need these resources? Well, as you maybe hold back to school nights or community meetings or parent meetings, you might want to also consider sharing some information from FEP, especially if you have new parents who are new parents to your district, or parents who are new to special education in particular. You'll find some information here. So I'm highlighting this one right here, Parent Information for Initial IEP Meeting. That's a PDF. A positive student profile, I think you'll find interesting. It's pretty good information for parents, but I really want to draw your attention to this MTSS graphic. Because sometimes I think parents who are new to special education feel like their kids are all of a sudden segregated from the rest of the school population. And that, even though it feels that way, we want to maybe try to reverse that feeling. The goal is that, especially with our Family Educator Partnership folks and the resources that they have, is that we're working together to provide education for all kids. And you'll notice that it's a pyramid, something you've seen before. Some kids get some supplemental supports, and a smaller number of kids get intensive supports. And when a student is on an IEP, they actually get services from all three arenas, if you will. So I think sometimes that's just a nice a nice graphic to share to let parents know that just because they're on an IEP doesn't mean they're in a separate school altogether any longer. All right. Going back to that agenda, I see that we have Val on. And Val, I understand you're going to speak with us about trauma responsive environments. Now, do you want me to run that link, or do you want me to stop sharing and allow you to share?
If you just want to run it, that's fine.
Terrific. I'll mute my microphone and you go. Or maybe I will. You go.
Okay. There has been a lot in the media. Trauma-informed care and adverse childhood experiences is not anything new. We are learning more and more about it, though, within Green Hills AEA. So Jenny wanted to take a few minutes as a learning support, the regional administrator in charge of learning supports, to share some of the things that have been going on. And probably the biggest thing that we've been doing within Green Hills is what's called Connections Matter. Some of you may have even seen some advertisements for Connections Matter on the Iowa Cable Advertising Network. Connections Matter was brought into Iowa by the Prevent Child Abuse Iowa Council, the people at the state level with them, and it is work based on Dr. Linda Chamberlain. So Connections Matter is really just that based on the premise that all kids can thrive if they have positive supporting, caring adults and relationships with them. So it's a presentation for teachers, parents, administrators. We've done it with community members too. It aligns with Paper Tigers and with Resilience. The team of us that were trained, we actually saw everything within one day. And it gives really layman's terms for how the brain actually works in response to trauma and how the brain really can change up to age 25. So within Green Hills, we offer several different formats of how you could learn more about Connections Matter. There's just kind of a standard 30-minute presentation. We have an hour expanded presentation with some more activities and discussion time. We've broken it up into 2 separate professional development sessions, more specifically for schools. And we also have a school that we're working with that they've divided it up into 4 sections, and that the expectation then is that the school will do some action planning around Connections Matter and being trauma sensitive and trauma responsive as they learn more about that. We do have 30 trainers within Green Hills AEA, so this is a great support for us and we're really excited about it. And if you're interested in that training, you can contact Jenny or Michelle Catterson, and they will direct you to somebody in your region who can provide more information on that. In addition, the agency through our media services has purchased the video Paper Tigers and Resilience. Paper Tigers, if you don't know, is a documentary about a high school in Walla Walla, Washington, who became the first, I believe, trauma sensitive high school in the United States. So it actually looks at the lives of 4 students within that and just kind of shares their story and how the staff adapted to meet their needs. Okay. And then we also have Sabers coming up on the radar, and I'm not going to talk too much about Sabers because that's on the agenda for later. Is that right, Carrie?
It is, but it's a pretty short agenda item. So if you have some results or some information that you want to share, feel free and we can shorten it on the other end. I'm sure you know more about it than I do.
Okay. I know it's available as part of the FastBridge suite for an additional purchase. It is considered a behavior screener, universal behavior screener. Teachers actually report, so it's teacher perception of student behavior, similar to if you've ever worked with your special ed reps and done a BASC or something like that, there's a rating scale. The results are used to understand student social, emotional, and behavioral needs at the universal level. And then there is some webinar training available from the Department of Education if you would like more information about it. Okay. We are really, really excited that we are going to offer our very first Learning Support Symposium that will be August 6th and 7th. It will be modeled loosely after the the literacy launch that was last August. We can announce our first keynote as Karen Williams. She actually works for the Center of Disease Control, and she has done a lot with understanding how the brain actually works in response to trauma, and she has some great tips for educators for just being aware of what happens to students' brains and to adults' brains as they experience trauma and they react to situations or unexpected situations that cause them stress, and how adult reactions kind of play into that. She's very entertaining if you've not seen her before, and engaging. So she's going to do a keynote, and she's also going to do some breakout sessions for us that day. The other sessions will highlight some of the services that we offer within Green Hills AEA. So they'll be like little 50-minute sessions. This is what we can offer you. Here's a couple tidbits you can use tomorrow, and if you want more information, who to contact. We will also have some skill sessions for educators of things they can use to start the year off with their classroom. And we are working on partnering with some community agencies to have them share, like in poster session format, what services they offer and how schools can connect with them. We will be having a marketing blitz in May, and hopefully by next Friday we will have our location locked down. We are looking at a fairly central location though. And then last, if you have any district or school needs, Jenny would be the lead regional administrator on that, and she can link you to supports for what we've talked about with trauma responsive classrooms and climates, social, emotional, and behavioral learning, PBIS, bullying prevention, and just school climate and culture overall. And I know there are several strands offered this summer in the PD catalog that you might want to look at and check out as well.
Terrific. Are there any questions for Val? I don't have access to the chat room, so if anyone sees one there, please, yep, there's a chat. Okay. All right. So I wanted to add to that. It is mentioned later, and really, I'm just curious to know, out of our participants, are there any schools that are planning on participating? And to remind those that are listening that the AEA will partner with the school districts, and I believe provide half of the cost of that assessment throughout this first pilot year. Thanks, Terry, for nodding. I'm assuming you're validating that. Thank you. Are there any schools that anyone that do you know if your district is participating?
Lewis Central is. They're on, I think.
Terrific.
Essex is looking, yeah, Jamie, Essex is probably going to do it next year. I'm just trying to look at who might be piloting.
So something that we mentioned earlier around the morning session was that because it's a screener, maybe some of our schools that are further down the PBIS line, or maybe even just getting started, that this might be a really nice data set to look at, because it does provide you with information leading to universal supports. Now, maybe you want to add something to that, Val, but I think it could be used for lots of reasons, but a nice launch if you're just getting started or a little bit into PBIS.
So, Carrie, you're getting some questions. I see R. Bolton. Your cost, LEA District's cost for the suite of math and behavior, is it a reduced cost this year because the AEA kicked in a substantial amount of money to get this up and running?
Kindergarten to sixth grade.
Kindergarten to sixth grade. The other thing is, yes, Lamoni, I do know, is doing Sabres, and I do believe they're doing math. You're crazy not to do, if you got in on this opportunity, you really need to try math and behavior.
I agree with that, Terry. This is Pat Rabbit. June 15th is the deadline for the fall sign up. And if you haven't heard from us or haven't getting an email, just reach out to myself or Terry, and preferably myself. But we can get you going on that. Any questions you have on that, I'll be happy to answer as well. Yesterday, you should have got an email regarding the ordering of FastBridge math materials. If you didn't get it, or if you have any questions, I have a couple of questions from folks I got to respond to this afternoon. So if you have any of those, I can even answer them now, or you can shoot me an email or a call.
And Pat, did you send that out to principals? Not all of our SPED coordinators are principals.
Correct. I sent it out to principals and to district FastBridge points of contact.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to the next item. I wanted to just draw your attention one more time to the SPED coordinator syllabus. And today's Zoom fulfills our time in class, if you will. And I'm going to scroll clear down to what is required. So there's about, I think, 8 or 10 people taking the class. So likely you were either on this morning or yet this afternoon. And essentially this is it right here, is for you to spend the time doing the work that or the discussions that we have here in the Zoom format and our face-to-face, and then looking also at your district data that is provided in the link, and then making a plan for addressing any identification issues. So you might be disproportionately identifying males or females or at a certain grade level. You may also find that there are no disproportionate data in your identification rates, and that's okay. Really just then that you've looked at it, that you've determined that there really isn't anything to be too concerned about, maybe looking a little bit deeper at your processes. If you would, just go ahead and connect with your regional administrator or connect with me, and we'll get that credit assigned. We'll just have a quick discussion over it. It's a fairly easy conversation to have with most of our districts, I believe. And we do have a deadline of June 1st. I'm going to say that's a wiggle room deadline. I know you all are busy and school is winding up, and that's probably not the most important thing on your to-do list on June 1st or prior to that. Just communicate with me and we'll make sure that we get through this together. So is Amy Alfrey on? Terry, do you see her as one of the participants?
Carrie, I've been looking and I do not see Amy on there.
All right.
I wondered if she was not able to be here this afternoon.
Okay, so I am bringing up, Amy Alfrey is our connection to the Department of Ed, and she's provided this special education update. I'll just zip through this pretty quick. You'll notice the IEP, IFSP system bullet, and the wahoo is really a nice celebration because the RFP is posted, and there is a link to the bid opportunity. Notice that it closes on May 21st. So what seems to have been a long time coming is actually starting to gain some steam now, and we're happy that that's all going to be a system that we can look at and learn to love. I personally am hoping that it sticks to the keep it simple, sweetie principle. So maybe I need to click on that link to bid opportunity and say, hey, how about keeping it simple? So then I'm going to drop down to the procedures manual update and let you know that there is a position open. Ron, you're welcome to join in on this because this is kind of work that you've been involved in.
Yeah, you bet. What has happened is that kind of through the Department of Ed, there's been a decision to create a position. It would be someone that would be a kind of a coordinator of sorts to take a look at the current state procedures, the manual, and turn that into more of an online kind of a resource. So kind of a little bit of a revamping of the state procedures manual. And so the position description, the link is there for you to look at. That's actually closed there. That went out through the various AAs in the recent past here. And the idea would be that Someone will be hired that's an existing AA employee, either part or full-time, that would become this project manager in the near future here. So that's just something that's in the works, and so it'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
You bet. The next position that's reposted, the explanation under posted is that the SPDG, SPDG coordinator that the department was utilizing moved out of state. And so they really wanted someone in state to stay closely connected to the work. And if you're familiar with that, that is work that's going on to support specially designed instruction across the state for different student populations and in different content areas. We certainly have some schools, maybe some that are on, that have been utilization sites, and that is eventually going to be all that SDI is and should be, and will be tools that will roll out, if you will, across the state for all schools to have access to and use intensely to get the kind of progress that we'd like to see with special education kids. I'm going to skip the B13 data next steps just because I will address that later on. And then the next couple bullets, employment guidance for districts. She has provided just some memos that went out from the Department of Ed just as a reminder. The school responsibility for employment memo that went out from Barb, and it has to do with IVRS, which we will hear a little bit more about this from Richard Clark later in the in this session. And then also to drop down then to graduation memos. So the good news is that they're still working on it. The bad news is we don't have any definite information as far as looking at our students who used to graduate according to IEP goals. The tabs that are listed there are just to remind you of what has been published so far by the Department of Education. More to come soon. We don't have a date provided to us to know when to expect some final guidance on how to support our students who are most significantly disabled. And then the highly qualified teacher language, I'm going to highlight this right here in quotes, appropriately licensed. So the rule and amendment shows here that HQT, or highly qualified teacher, has been changed in chapter 41, which is our special education chapter. And it is now to say appropriately licensed. Now, our guidance from Amy this morning is that there's really no change in meaning. There's just a change in language. And there was a reason, the reason for changing that was to be more consistent with, as it says right here, with ESSA, or Every Student Succeeds Act. All right, and then Amy put a plug in for the Special Education Summer Symposium, noting that it's filling up fast. I think she said that they have room for 1,500, maybe 1,700 folks, and at her last check, it was at 1,200. It's June 11th and 12th at the Iowa Event Center, and there's a registration there. The link for registration is there. It is free. So they have strands for information. I'd like to tell you what all the strands are. I know that there's a strand for transition, which is the one I'm probably going to live in, but I hope that you all have a chance to take a look at that. It has been my experience that it's been a pretty good symposium for for folks who whose work is in special education. Okay, getting to here. All right. All right, so Ron, do you want to take over on the Special Education for Administrators course? And do you want me to run that, or
if you want to unshare, I can pull it up and then I can just kind of navigate. Thank you.
There you go. It's all yours.
Thank you. Okay, This is really just, well, I guess the first part is just kind of an announcement. You see there in the agenda, there is going to be offered this summer, and Angie Hams, Patrick Grabbett, and David Van Horn are going to be actually teaching this course. It's going to be on site at the Crescent AEA as a location, but you can see the dates there. But the intent is just a course offering with the target audience really being administrators, with kind of general information on special education. And you can see over there to the right that this is currently in the AA online PD system as a course. We were talking this morning that right now it's in there as a 2-day, that June 20th, 25th, one license renewal option, but there's going to be an additional option added to make it 2 credits. And so the June 20th and 25th is kind of the core of the course, but then this August 2nd has been tagged on there. There's kind of in the works plans for a special education law symposium. It's going to be a 1-day event on August 2nd, and the idea would be that could be kind of packaged together with the other 2 days to even offer this as a 2 license renewal course. So that is going to be happening, just a possibility if that's something that would be beneficial to any of you. And I guess I'm told that it's others could join in as well, not just administrators, but the target audience really is building level administrators that would like to talk more about special education topics. And that's kind of the second part here. I'm scrolling down here a little bit where it says suggestions from the field. The syllabus is in there and the general plan for the course, but there would be some flexibility in what kind of content is covered in the course. And what you see here would just be ideas that are out there about topics that could be a part of the course. And you can see some of those. I think a few of these were added from discussion this morning. So I could just stop talking for a minute here. As you look at that, I don't know if anybody out there in the field has some thoughts. Can you think of, if you were attending this course, can you think of other specific topics that would be beneficial for you? So I can just pause for a minute and see if any other folks have ideas. And you can see, I can pause longer here, but you can see some of the things on this list would be kind of foundational kind of things, legal foundations, some of the perhaps a review of some of the basics kind of IEP compliance kinds of issues. But you can also see down here, the thought would be maybe spending some time on some, more current issues or issues where there's change occurring. This AW case that we've talked about, what are the current implications of that? And so it would be an opportunity for reviewing some of those kinds of things. This graduation update that we're going to be anxiously awaiting, that the state's changed the position on graduation criteria. So opportunity for some topics like that. All right. I'm sorry, are you trying to?
I have an emergency that I just think I need to.
I guess I would add to that if in this area right here, Angie, Ron, you're sharing, but I will go ahead and talk to the executive function 2-day workshop that's September 26th and 27th with George McCloskey. The location is yet to be determined, but if you want to maybe save the date there on your calendars. Executive function, with that 2-day workshop comes a nice resource, a book and a CD, and it permits us to, for those participants, to learn more about some tools and some strategies to help students learn, or a way to model executive functioning skills so that kids can practice them as well. So when you think about executive functioning, sometimes people go, you know, I know I've heard that term, I'm not quite sure how it applies. Think of, not always, but think in particular about students who have ADHD, and sometimes their executive functioning skills aren't nearly as well developed as maybe their peers. So they have trouble organizing, acting impulsively, really just trying to make it through the day, and recognizing that, like an academic example, they have a project that's due in 2 weeks. But figuring out when to get started so that you can complete it in time is a complete mystery. And oftentimes kids just won't even get started then. They just can't seem to manage things mentally in their heads without maybe some tools to help them organize their lives and stay with it so that they can get through a day in a peaceful way. So, all right, Ron, I think Richard is on. Richard, are you there? We're a little early.
Yep, I'm here.
Terrific.
Let me take
Ron,
that.
do you want to stop sharing and I'll go into the...
You bet. I will.
Zoom.
I'm gonna unshare right now, and I'm sorry that I turned away there. We had just a little brief crisis here, but I'm back now. So I'm gonna turn that sharing off.
Terrific. Thank you. Terrific. So Val Gigrich, could you give me a nod if you're seeing the agenda? Thank you. All right. Let me scroll down in the agenda. So I am happy to introduce to you today Richard Clark from the Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services. Richard, I'll mute. You go ahead and start, maybe just define yourself a little better for our audience, if you would.
Okay. Hi, you guys. My name's Richard Clark. I'm a resource manager for Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services. I kind of oversee contracts and programming for VR on this side of the state. I cover Council Bluffs, all the way over to Creston, all the way down to Clarinda, all the way up through Sioux City, and then over to Burlington and Ottumwa. So I kind of have a weird little L-shaped part of the state that I cover. But we were trying to get out and try to catch schools up on information around WIOA. I know that some of you have probably heard some of this before. We just want to clarify and make sure that we get it through clear and concise so that you have a real clear understanding of what VR can do and should be doing, and then also how it impacts your schools. That will kind of be the basis of what we'll present today. Is just, so if we look at the agenda for the day, it really is the impact that WIOA has on schools, what a local school plan is, and then of course the memorandum of agreement. I go through this pretty quick, so there's a lot of information I'm going to throw at you, but just bear with me. If you have questions, jump in, ask your questions, and then we'll kind of go from there. So what is WIOA? It's the VR. It's the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act that was signed into law in 2014. We did not get our rules until late 2016, early 2017. So we're just now really getting all this information out to everybody. Like I said, we've done some of these presentations statewide before, but after meeting with Carrie, we've decided that we wanted to be a little more directive in Green Hills and try to get it right to the schools, specifically to SPED directors. We've already presented to superintendents. So we're trying to be very directive in how we get this. It did make major changes to the VR program, really focusing on transition. The good news is for us, although it made major changes, we were already doing some really neat things in transition. The state of Iowa has led the country in percentage of students connected to VR in the country for a while now. So we're a little ahead of the game, but still made some pretty powerful changes. So what was the purpose? It was to empower individuals with disabilities to maximize employment, economic self-sufficiency, independence, and inclusion in an integration into society. So with this said, this law is a workforce-based law. So it is not a school-based law. So we wanted to make sure that we showed you how they really tried to align IDEA and WIOA. I mentioned this earlier this morning that we've heard rumors from the federal partners that IDEA will be written again sometime. When that happens, I don't know, but the goal would be that it would align even closer with WROA as it gets rewritten. So what does it do? How does it align with IDEA? It focuses on collaboration between IVRS, LEAs, and other partners such as AEA, community rehab partners, workforce, adult education, those kinds of programs. IVRS will work with schools to create a continuum of services. So it really wants us to outline how we're working with schools, what that looks like for schools, and then how we can enhance or expand on services the schools are already offering. Services will not supplant the legal responsibility of the schools. So the school is already responsible for work-based learning, self-advocacy. We won't supplant those services, but what we can do is come in and try to enhance them. How do we make them more impactful? How do we bring in the business partners, those kinds of programming? And of course, the goal of the collaboration is to develop a system that will lead to competitive integrated employment for all students with disabilities. So one of the biggest changes with our law, and I think one of the most influential, is the potentially eligible language. If you've worked with VR in the past, you're aware that we used to have students that would go on a waiting list and they could not receive services until they came off the waiting list. They really couldn't receive any services until they've applied and come off that waiting list. So with potentially eligible, the law really states that any student with a disability who's currently on an IEP or covered under the 504 plan, regardless of whether the student has applied or been determined eligible for VR, can still receive some services. Those services are the pre-employment transition services. They're very specific to 5 required activities, and we'll go over those a little bit later. But it really does outline that this is a major change in that we can come into the school and work with students who aren't even on our books, who may not even intend to apply for VR services down the road, but we can come in and partner with the schools, provide basic information to them, provide some of these services to them. All we would need is documentation of that potentially eligible student. So that's going to be the cover sheet of the IEP, the cover sheet of the 504 plan, or if they're not on an individual 504 plan, but they would be covered by a school-wide type of plan, such as automatic doors for someone in a wheelchair. They may not be on a specific 504 plan because the school-based 504 plan is covering that. You would just need an email from the school or documentation from the school saying, hey, this student is covered under a 504 plan for the school and they have a disability. At that point, we're good. That's all we would need. So 1 of 3 documentation, the email, the cover of the 504 plan, or the cover of the IEP. So what are the 5 required activities? Job exploration counseling. Really that's looking at career scopes. How do we do ONET interest inventories, looking at those career opportunities out there for them, really exploring all the different job opportunities. That could include job shadowing and those types of things as well. Work-based learning experiences. So this is going to be very similar to like your work experience programs. How we get them into work-based learning experiences. Counseling on opportunities. This is looking at post-secondary, such as what kind of accommodations they would need in post-secondary schools, what kind of post-secondary options are available in their area from secondary school or a college type of setting, whether that's apprenticeships, 4-year degrees, 2-year degrees, occupational trainings, those types of things. Workplace readiness training. This could be where the VR counselor is coming into the school and providing resume development, application completion, soft skills training. Some schools, we are seeing them come in and actually join into the work-based learning classes so that they're partnering with that teacher to teach specific to disability and how that works. Self-advocacy instruction. I would tell you this is one of our weakest areas. We're still trying to figure all the different unique ways we can do self-advocacy training. One of the best ways we found is doing student-led IEPs. And we work with the students to talk about what accommodations they need, what kind of services they're going to need. So they're actually at some point leading the IEP discussion on how they can benefit from the services the school has to offer. This is just kind of a graph of kind of how they interact with our 5 required activities, with some of the required activities that you guys have under IDEA. So like with job exploration counseling, kind of aligns with community experiences, functional vocational evaluation, work-based learning really, connects with that work experience programs you guys offer or the functional vocational evaluation. Counseling opportunities, you're looking at that functional evaluation again. Employment post and post-school options for them, work readiness, community experiences, and then instruction and self-advocacy, that adult living, and instructions in daily living skills. So you can kind of see how some of the activities you guys are already doing are some of the activities that we're required to do as well. So instead of coming in and just doing those, taking those over, what we're saying is, how can we come together and really come up with a collaborative way to provide these services to students and do it more intensely, sorry. So getting them in there, how do we expand those? So if you're already having a work experience program, but maybe it's only housed in the high school. So you have students working with the janitor, students working with the main office. Well, maybe VR can come in and, okay, how do we get them out into the community? How do we get businesses involved to do work experience so they're getting those real work experiences in the community, or even paid work experiences in the community? It really is not to increase work that everybody else is doing, but how to not duplicate, but rather enhance those services. So with that said, it goes to the local school plans. I don't know how many of you have been involved in any local school plan discussion, but every public high school in the state of Iowa should have a local school plan developed. It really should outline what IVRS will do, what the school will do, so determine how to best implement the PREETs in their school. So shared responsibility, collaboration, which should equal positive outcome for students. Nothing, once again, like I said, nothing in legislation allows IVRS to supplant the legal requirements of the school, but what it does, it allows us to enhance those. So we want that local school plan to really outline, okay, here's what the school already offers. Is there gaps in those services that VR can fill? Can we enhance those services in any way? And then, so here's what VR is going to do to provide those services for the school as well. Here's what AEA is going to do. If you have a Transition Alliance program or a TAP, here's how TAP's going to be involved in that program as well. So you could have multiple columns on that plan. That plan really should not be a form that the VR counselor just fills out and gives to you. It should be a discussion with SPED teacher, SPED director, or some administration in the school where you're sitting down together and saying, okay, here's what we're doing as a school. Here's what VR is doing. How do we partner together to provide the best possible ways? And you outline that on that plan. The VR counselor would sign that plan. The school, someone from school administration would sign that plan, whether that's the SPED director, whether it's the administrator, such as a principal, or whether it's the superintendent. And different schools have done it differently. Some just have the SPED director sign it. Some will take it all the way up to the superintendent. So it depends on what you want to do there in that local school building to make sure that it's outlined correctly. If you have not seen your local school plan, you should be reaching out to your VR counselor to say, hey, what's this about? Where's this at? We will be partnering with AEA to get more involvement with that, hopefully coming in the fall. So if you haven't seen one to this point, hopefully in the fall, we'll see this discussion ramp up even more. That will be required across the state. So what does this mean for schools? It does not change any of the transition requirements under IDEA or FAPE. Documentation is required before a person can enter subminimum wage employment. So with section 511, which I didn't go into a lot of detail because that can take up another whole day, but really it is, we should not be entering these students into subminimum wage work without going through certain steps, such as counseling on opportunities, work experiences, those types of things, and we'd have to document all that. Schools cannot enter into contracts with agencies to provide subminimum wage. So if you're working with someone like Cast Incorporated or Goodwill or some of the other CRPs, community rehab partners you have out there, schools are not allowed to do that anymore for subminimum wage. Schools can still enter into contracts with those agencies for other services, such as instructional training, job coaching, assessments, those types of things. And then the other part to this would be the MOA, the Memorandum of Agreement that VR has with the Department of Education. So when this all came about, our federal partner, our federal overseeing body said we have to do a Memorandum of Agreement or a contract with every district in our state. And we pushed back a little bit and said, you know, we have 300 and some districts. We want to do one large one with the state Department of Education and say, okay, here's everybody's responsibilities. And then we'll go into the schools and do a local plan that's very specific to that each individual school district, because we didn't want a cookie cutter approach. We wanted it to be very unique to each district. And they allowed us to do that. So we created the MOA with DE, really was to define responsibilities of both divisions within a tiered system of support. provide for efficient and effective utilization of agency resources, minimize duplication, and delineate a basis for continuous, effective working relationships between two agencies. The biggest issues we've seen has been the instructional training. VR cannot provide what we used to call job coaching. It's now called instructional training. We cannot provide that for a student while they're in work experience or while they're still in high school, unless certain requirements are met. So schools are responsible for that portion of the training, whether that's contracting out with a community rehab partner to provide that instructional training, or whether it's providing an associate to go out and provide that instructional training. That was one of the bigger ones through the process. The MOA, you can find the original document that outlines everything either under the Department of Education's website or under the VR website. That was a lot of information I just threw at you in a really, really short amount of time. I told the group this morning, it's like I gave you a 20-minute presentation, a 2-hour presentation or 2-day presentation in 20 minutes. So questions you have for me?
Richard, I'm going to jump in here and just talk a little bit more about that local school plan. As a result of the conversations that our transition team has had over the last year with Richard and his VR counselor serving our agency, we have determined that maybe those plans would be have greater impact, be more meaningful for students if we took advantage of that opportunity to meet. So some special education reps who are on this Zoom, this may be new information. It's information that you'll find out about on Friday and then again in the fall. But our plan as a transition team is to work with our special education representatives and the teachers that they work most closely with and their building principals to coordinate that local school plan that VR needs to have and utilize that conversation to, as you mentioned, clearly delineate what's VR going to offer for students as a group or specific students. What is the AEA's responsibility? How are they going to assist in transition activities and supports? And what specifically is the school going to try to accomplish with grade levels or groups of students or even individual students? So I think really concentrating on this partnership is going to have a greater benefit for our students. Any other questions that you have for Richard or for me with regards to the WIOA presentation? I don't see anything in chat unless I've missed it. Richard, thank you for joining us again this afternoon.
And like I mentioned earlier this morning, if people, after they walk away from this and they start thinking about it, they have questions, don't hesitate to send that to me. Carrie has my information. She can share that with you guys. So if you want to send me questions, if we have a bunch of them, we can kind of put together a frequently asked question to send out, or I can respond directly to try to answer your questions. So don't feel like you can ask a bad question, because a lot of this is still new and it is a lot of information.
And I will add your email, if that's okay, to this agenda here shortly. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. All right. So the B13 transition update that Amy Alfrey had listed, I'd like to just go ahead and cover here. Just so you know, I actually stole these slides from some information that we received from the Department of Ed and then synthesized for our special education representative meeting on Friday, and then specifically filtered it out again just for you folks. And I wanted to draw your attention to probably something you are already aware of. Last June, the transition team and several other special education representatives conducted a file review of 650 IEPs. That was just our apportionment of all that was done across the state. So our AEA alone did 650. From that, the Department of Education took a look at that data and determined which schools needed the most support to reach that 100% compliance in B13 criteria. As a result, and I just to historically connect you to this, every time we've said on March 15th, there's going to be some data or there's going to be a letter that goes out. Well, it did. I think it actually arrived around March 22nd, but that information went out, and as a result, our AEA had 15 school districts that scored below 50%. And then the rest of our school districts scored above 50%. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit first about those that scored above the 50%. And this is what is required of you. If you scored above the 50%, you will need to make corrections in the iStar system. And those corrections have to be done by March 15th, 2019. So if you think back, you've had a year, not that you knew you had to make corrections, but you've had a year, essentially a year has gone by since those IEPs were reviewed. So they've likely been updated through the annual review process. And some will exit out and move on and graduate, and then so it could still happen by, you might be looking at 2 IEPs out from the original data set if you wait till March 15th, 2019 to complete this review. Now, this is done at the local level, and your special education representative is your connection to the iStar program. So you simply make the connections for those citations that you were provided in iStar, and your special education representative will look at that IEP and just note in iStar that it had been corrected. And that's really essentially all the majority of our districts have to do. So you have time to do it. If you want to put the fast track on it and get it done quickly, communicate that with your special education representative. Or if you want to say, you know, we've got a year, we can manage to get this done within a year, you know, you won't have very many to fix is what I'll say. So that's at your leisure to accomplish. However, there were 15 districts that fell below 50%. And I'm not publishing those 15 districts. If you want to know if your district is one of those 15 districts, you are welcome to shoot me an email and I'll be happy to let you know. Out of professional courtesy, I've been asked not to share that information publicly. However, I will tell you it is located and populated right now in iStar. And so it's public information, but they just don't want us to publish it. So for those 15 districts that fell below the 50%, here's the things that you probably need to know and keep on your radar. The transition team and a few other special education representatives from the AEA will review those IEPs. So remember, those IEPs are already selected. They've been randomly selected from your district, and we will review those by June 30th of this year. And we will review another set of randomly selected IEPs from your district next year. Now, to get ready for this review round that will take place in June, you have a couple options. You could say, hey, as a district, I want of the 8 IEPs that we're going to have reviewed, I would like for my special education rep to pair up with a transition coach and give us some feedback about what we need to do to fix those IEPs prior to June 1st. Because we'll take June to take a look at all of them. Or you could say, you know, we're going to get reviewed again. Let's just go with the flow. We're not going to do any prep between now and the end of the school year. And you all can just review our IEPs and tell us what, give us the feedback that we need to hear in order to fix those and improve those IEPs for B13 compliance. So 15 districts, you have a couple options. One, you can say, hey, we want a little help. We want to do like a little test review, if you will, and fix what we want to fix and what we can get fixed prior to have them being reviewed again in June. Or you can say, we'll let it go this year and then start in next year making some changes. Our special education representatives as a whole group will get this same message on Friday. And our transition coaches are already aware of it. You may have already heard something from them. So you may not get any next step action, if you will, until after Friday. But as I said, if you aren't sure, if you are one of those 15 districts, just shoot me an email and we will, I will confirm that or deny that, I guess. So, all right, I'd like to ask right now if there's any questions that you have about B13 transition. As an example, Shenandoah, I know, doesn't have any citation, or they didn't fall below the 50%. So Shenandoah, Trish Payne, I saw that you were on. Trish will just go into those IEPs, review them, and sign off that they've been reviewed. All right, we are running a little bit ahead of schedule. Our break is at 2 o'clock. Why don't we meet back here at 2:05? Oh wait, we need a 10-minute break. At 2:10, we'll just take a little longer break. See you at 2:10. All right, Lori, we're on break, so I'll answer that when we get back. Terrific. It's 2:10 by my digital clock, and thank you all for joining us again. Lori, before we left for break, Lori Teese asked a really great question. Her question is on the screen. What is the future plan for those that are currently above 50%? That's a great question, Lori. So I will tell you that what we have learned is that there are essentially 3 areas that need the most attention. One is assessment, out of the 6 critical elements. One is assessment, one is course of study, and the other one is post-secondary outcomes. So in studying the data, we've developed some what we would consider some best practices that we'd like to get out to the field. And so we will be developing some training for that. And how that takes place is we haven't really determined. We'd really like to be able to say, here's some tools, here's some training that the AEA can offer you as a school district. And now school district, how do you want to do this? So do you want it done, all in one day? Probably it will depend on the size of your school district. So a district the size of Lewis Central is going to have a different need and want to accomplish something probably different than a school the size of Fremont Mills. And so we really want to be responsive to what works best for your district. So it'll be our transition coaches working with your special education representatives to accomplish that learning and that new training on best practices. But this is what I will tell you. For those of you who are familiar with B13 and have felt the angst of those citations over several years, we went through what we would call a calibration. Some might even call it a recalibration. And as we move forward, and we continuously, annually, will be reviewing randomly selected IEPs. We won't randomly select those IEPs. The Department of Education will do that for us. However, our own staff will be looking at only IEPs from our AEA. So I feel really good that we're looking at something close to home and we can provide some really good feedback that way. Additionally, we are guided now to look at the IEP as a whole. It used to be if it wasn't in the right spot, it was an automatic no, it didn't meet compliance. And so we really, though it's really nice as a reviewer to have everything in like the most obvious spot, it doesn't necessarily have to be there. And we really have the permission, if you will, to look throughout the IEP, treat it as a whole document, and look for that information. Additionally, we also were trained at one time to look for specific words, and we aren't looking for that now. It used to be, it was really only counted correct or compliant if we used the student will. And now we can use words like the student plans to, or it is expected that the student will do something. It really has to be something observable. So that's really the concentration, not the specific verbs that are used. Some other corrections that we would want to try to take a look at, or some things that we have kind of not really loosened, but have gotten more clear on what we need to look for. It would include things like looking at the assessments and making sure that the assessments drive what the transition plan looks like. So it's based on student need. In course of study, it really is nice to have what the student what all students are expected to take, what the student has completed, what the student still needs to complete, and what course is linked to post-secondary outcomes or desires for that student. That's a really good way to look at it. And we can also, if it's not clearly laid out, we have the permission to kind of go ahead and figure it out. And then the third one in post-secondary outcomes, thinking about the student beyond the graduation stage. So really pinpointing and getting exact about where the student's going to live, What employment opportunities will they seek? What are they going to learn? So really expanding that perspective to not just getting them to walk across the graduation stage, but what happens at least a year out. I saw that Nancy Lindgren is on, Samantha Wilson I think is on, I'm not sure who else is on. If they're transition coaches, if you guys have anything to add, you're welcome to add. Lori, that was a long-winded answer to your question. Do you have something in particular that you'd still like to ask? And you can take yourself off mute if you want. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and drop down to the next item. And as Val mentioned earlier, this is the behavior screener. Oh, thank you, Lori. All right. So the behavior screener, SABRS is the social, academic, and emotional behavior risk screener. And this is some information that I wanted to share with you. Oops. Well, it looks to me like all of these slides have been skipped over. This is the information that I wanted you to see. Why SABRS? So just to reiterate, that is a teacher completed screener, which ensures that it's a universal type screener. So there wouldn't be a lot of need to calibrate that differently. It's K-12, there are 19 items, and it takes 1 to 3 minutes to complete per student. So those are some details that I don't think were necessarily mentioned, and I wanted to make sure that if you're contemplating jumping into that pilot, that you have a few more details. Val, if you're still on and you have some more details to share or can answer any questions, if there are any questions at this point. As Terry Bush and Patrick Pat Rabbit already mentioned, it's probably a really good opportunity, and we would strongly encourage any district to jump into this pilot or this first trial run. All right.
Hold on. It's too late to join the trial now. They have to wait next year.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, there's a June 15th deadline for the fall.
Right.
Sign up.
And that is what is available now. Mm-hmm.
Right. And that email has gone out to districts and principals, superintendents. If they need any clarification, obviously reach out to myself or anybody, any regional administrator can support it.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're on, because I've learned a little bit more than I knew just from this morning. So thank you.
Sure.
All right. The next section is questions from the field. And these are questions that you have sent out to David. And if this is a question that you have asked and you want to clarify it or provide some context around it, that would be lovely. This really is more of a forum and a discussion. If you're looking for a yes, no, black, white answer, you won't get one. But please listen, because I think as people talk about their situations or their understandings or the filters that they use to think about how to problem solve through these situations, I think it will probably match some of the situations that you have. But I do invite you to weigh on any of these or your particular questions. Here's the first one. Where can SDI occur? Can it occur in general ed and special ed? And essentially, what are the procedures for making the call and implementing? Does anyone want to claim that question, or is it a question that you also have that you said, yeah, this is what I'm thinking about and how it looks in my school? Okay, so where can SDI occur? The first filter that I use is that SDI is not a setting. It's not bound by any setting. So it can occur in general education classrooms. It can occur in special education classrooms. In the procedures for making the call and implementing, I would just strongly suggest that it is a team decision. So how that specially designed instruction takes place is a conversation that all around the table at a staffing clearly understand, because it could be individualized, certainly. Now, there's some additional thought around that, because sometimes people think, oh gosh, only a special education teacher can provide specially designed instruction. That's not necessarily true. And so what we know is that in some of our schools, there's a really good setup of co-teaching going on, and where the special education teacher and the general education teacher are working together with a group of students in, let's say, algebra, and the general education teacher is teaching all students for the first 45 minutes, and the next 30 minutes, the special education teacher is working directly on instruction related to a group of kids that are on IEPs. There might be another one or two thrown in there that are struggling, or working individually with a student. They may pull them out. They may just work right with them in the classroom. I would just ask for anyone to chime in about, but what if kinds of situations, or here's the situation. Tell me how it looks in this kind of situation, or this kind of context in my school. Zoom wait time is difficult. All right, well, in the vein of asking questions about specially designed instruction, moving on to the next question. My special education staff are concerned about inclusion of students in the regular general education classrooms. They ask often for special sections or special classes because of pacing, covered material, etc. Maybe a discussion around that. Do you have some schools out there, or some of our audience? Do you guys have some experiences where your perhaps maybe your middle school, your high school is offering a science class that might be covering the same material but at a different pace, or an English class? I know it happens frequently in math. All right, so some filters to think about is offering classes is a locally controlled decision, locally determined. So there are two groups that you need to appease when you're offering classes, and that one is obviously it's based on student need, and your board supports it, and it falls within the guidelines of the Department of Education's Chapter 12 matrix. So if you're thinking about offering special sections of classes, I heard one school district this morning say, well, they have English 10 and then they have basic English 10. And basic English 10 is taught by the special education teacher in consultation with the 10th grade English teacher, and that there's a good deal of collaboration. The certified or appropriately licensed teacher, highly qualified, is the one who's selecting the material, the content, assigning the grades. They're kind of in charge of the class. And there's, it takes a lot of consultation and collaboration to make that kind of situation work. The other point that we wanted to bring about is my special education staff are concerned about inclusion of students. As it was mentioned earlier by a colleague of ours, let's take the S off that and think about a student as an individual. And what is it that they specifically need? and then thinking about what they need, and then comparing your resources to be able to supply that need. Thank you, Patrick. Patrick just posted in our chat box some FastBridge communication. It's the most recent communication on the spring 2018 implementation. Thank you, Patrick. So I'm curious, are there other schools who have tracked, if you will, some students, or are they providing separate classes for special education students?
And Carrie, this is Ron. Just while people are thinking about that, something I was going to throw in from a discussion this morning when Amy Alfrey was with us. We brought up kind of going back to the formerly known as highly qualified teacher, now appropriately licensed. There's that issue of reverse consultation. So this idea that what you just said there, that we may have situations where the special education teacher is primarily instructing, let's pick something, math or history, but then the expectation would be that there's a person with the correct license who's consulting, so that reverse consultation. But we know in past guidance that we had from the DE, that was to be a very infrequent kind of a situation, mostly for kids that have more severe kinds of disabilities. And we actually asked Amy, will we get some additional guidance on what that should look like with some of the language change with the SSA? And I think her response was she thought that we would be seeing something. And that question has been raised by a few others as well. So.
Ron, and I'll just add to that, something that we did discuss from this morning that I would like to bring up here is that certainly you don't want to change the expectation that you have for students on IEPs. The general education expectations that you have for all kids still apply to all kids, even those that have IEPs. So that's why it's really important to plan for how those needs are met. It might be possible that you'd be able to offer a course that is at a different pace or is differentiated to the degree that a group of students might need if you have the resources to cover that. But also think about, let's say you advertise like in your course catalog, if you will, or your course selection sheet that students select courses from as they plan for their next semester. Let's say you have a basic 10 algebra class and a basic and just a algebra 10 class. So that one thing to consider is it is not, if you cannot discriminate against students in taking courses. So let's say you have a student who's would be perfectly fine in a typical general ed algebra course, but they want to take the basic course for a variety of reasons. One might be, maybe their scores say they're good at it or they can handle it, but maybe they don't have the confidence in themselves. Or maybe it doesn't match their schedule. Maybe they really want to take another course when the expected math course is being offered. So just remember that it can't be offered as an exclusionary course for IEP students only. The next question, Ron, do you want to tackle that one? I know that you kind of altered that a little bit.
Oh, sure. It was, the question, I'll just read it as is. How do we address students with significant academic delays, not alternate assessment? I think originally the question that came in from the field was students that are very low. And I guess we interpreted that as kind of being, maybe not the kinds of students that, or I guess we had a question, was the intent of that question talking about kids that have intellectual disabilities or those that are kind of those, for lack of a better word, bubble kids that are kind of right between our kids with mild kinds of disabilities and those with more severe ones. But how do we address that and a teacher's desire to create sections classes for these students? The examples are pre-algebra or English class that moves slower and may change, modify the amount of curriculum taught, geared for a select group of students. So again, that's similar, but a little bit different than some of the other variations of this kind of question. I guess one thing, and I'd be interested if anybody wants to chime in with their thoughts or questions about this. I think a key word is modify. If we are doing coursework that is substantially modifying the Iowa core, that starts to sound more like the essential elements of core, which truly is supposed to be modified curriculum for kids that have severe intellectual disabilities. When we're doing that, we're truly modifying the curriculum and the expectations. But we weren't totally sure if the question was regarding this population of kids or more of these bubble kids. But typically, if we're not talking about an alternate kind of curriculum, modifications would be pretty rare. We'd be more about differentiated instruction and accommodations to help kids access the core.
I would offer also, as you are looking at preparing next semester's courses, it's always a good idea to take a look at the skill sets of the next group of students that you're expecting. Let's say you're a math teacher and you are assigned to teach geometry, and you might be looking then at those kids that you would naturally inherit because chronologically they're taking your class next. It's always a good idea to take a look at where those students' skill sets are and move them from that point forward. So it might be that you have a group of students who maybe you have 15 kids that really have not made the expected growth in math skills that you would have wanted to see by that certain grade level. And so perhaps maybe you do group them in a situation where they might be starting in a different place. Keep in mind, there's good research out there that talks about the grouping of kids, and that heterogeneous grouping typically is best and better than homogeneous grouping. So making sure that our kids have the opportunity to learn from other students in their classroom. So, all right. Not seeing any more questions. Ron, you've got the next part. Do you want to control the screen?
That would be great.
I will stop sharing then.
Okay. Okay, this next part of the agenda here was really just intended to be just some end of the year reminders for in the area of IEP procedures. So a couple of things we wanted to spend some time talking about are just getting into things that you can remind your teachers and work with your teachers about as we head to the end of the year here. The first one is just a reminder of something I think we're all aware of, extended year services. So we know that's kind of rare and unusual, but the small number of students where the IEP team has determined that the student does need extended year services. Just a reminder that as we're practically in May here, now's the time to make sure that your special ed teachers, that things are scheduled, that we have down on the IEP forms the amount of time, the number of sessions, and all those kinds of things. So just a reminder to make sure those things are well planned for summer. The link that I put on there is just, it's actually not the state procedures. It's a little section on the Department of Ed website that has some limited IEP guidance, and I feel like this is it's a nice reminder of what extended school year services are, when they're provided to students, what some of the criteria are. And so I thought that was just kind of a nice brief cheat sheet to kind of refresh your memory on some of those issues. So we just linked that in there. The next bullet was a reminder of using the post-secondary summary or SAR forms for students who are graduating. So when we look at our graduates, bear with me as I scroll back here a little bit. I'm just showing you now, this is straight from the state procedures guide, but a reminder that any student with a disability with an IEP who is graduating, there is an IDEA requirement to provide a summary for post-secondary living, learning, and working. And that's supposed to be completed at the exit from the IEP prior to graduation. So the intention of this was that students graduate and go on to either post-secondary education or the work world, they would have a summary of some of these issues associated with a disability. So you can, as I scroll through here, this is a form that just can be completed by your teachers, through the web IEP system, but it's done at graduation time. The post-secondary expectations, a little summary of the kinds of support services the students have had, their goal areas, what areas have they been working on, a brief summary of current levels, functional impact, and it doesn't go on here. Accommodations are a big one. Whatever setting that student is moving on to, this is a form that would have a summary of what accommodations they might need, and then recommendations. So contacts for adult community agencies. So this is supposed to be just a summary of disability-related issues that a student can take with them onto their next setting. So that doing this form is fulfilling an IDA requirement, but also in Iowa, there's a second option, and it is either or, the post-secondary summary or the SAR, which I'm showing you here stands for support for accommodation requests. The SAR is a little bit of a different version, and this one was developed in Iowa with the intent of, this is the one you use for students who are going on to a 2- or 4-year college. So in most cases, you would choose the SAR for a student that has a mild disability, presuming they are going on to a 2- or 4-year college. So you can imagine, you can look at some of the information on here. If it's maybe a student with a reading disability or ADHD or something like that, but they're on an IEP, maybe their plan is to go to the University of Iowa in the fall. They would have this summary, which is that they could take to their accommodations department. Any diagnostic information, diagnosis, discussion about their areas of disability, and probably most importantly, history of accommodations. Okay, so you may have a University of Iowa student who's saying, hey, I need additional time on my tests. The university could look at this SAR form and see that, perhaps that kind of thing has been happening throughout high school. Okay, so suggested accommodations. All right, so something that just needs to be provided as students graduate. So would be a good thing to remind your special ed teachers that are working with 12th graders that are about to wrap things up. The next item, notice of records destruction for LEA and AEA. I can take that link here and it just takes us to some templates, and I can pull one up here shortly. This form is also something that we would be doing at graduation time. We know that the AEA's policy, and this is would be the same for districts as well. We are supposed to retain records for 5 years following the exit from special education. In this case, it would be graduation. For many years, when we'd store them for 5 years later, we would typically get the last address on hand. We'd send a letter out saying, "Dear parent or student, we've retained your records for 5 years. Now we're going to destroy them. Please let us know if you want them." Very imperfect system because often addresses have changed. It's hard to get that information out to the student or family after the fact. So a number of years back, these notices were created. And you can see here what I'm showing you. There's one for AEA and there's one for school district. And it just simply is, pull a shell up here. it's a notice that records will be destroyed, and we put a date in there. So at the time, for example, of an exit, a graduation time, it would be explained to the student and family, we're going to retain these for 5 years until this date. At that time, we're going to destroy them. Please sign here. This form looks cleaner when we download it, but then there's a signature on file. We retain that. So in cases where we have that signature, 5 years from now, when our secretaries go to do that destruct process, shredding and so forth, they have the parent or student's signature on file saying it's okay to do that. We were notified of this 5 years ago. You notified us ahead of time, and then we don't have to attempt to send out that letter. Okay, so again, just a reminder that for students graduating, we want those 2 forms signed. And that just helps us to facilitate that records destruct process. Let me stop talking there. For those 3 bullets, there were a few more reminders here, but any questions about any of those things, or things that people would like to add? Or okay, seems pretty quiet out there. And the last 3 things, just pretty quick, but progress monitoring. Just April's a good time to kind of remind our teachers and also for us to remind our staff that are implementing IEPs. Please have your progress monitoring up to date in the system before you leave for the summer. Okay, so just get that data in there so that we don't have cases of IEPs sitting out there for 3 months without, not being up to date. So just a reminder, encouragement for teachers to do that. And this one, submitting IEPs. Just a reminder to teachers, before they leave for the summer, if they have recently done IEPs, maybe they were done in mid or late May, make sure that they're wrapped up and submitted for validation to our AAA secretaries before they leave for the summer. That way, again, we would avoid having kind of incomplete documents sitting out there, and things are up to date. And then the last reminder is just the thing that hopefully teachers are doing throughout the year, those report cards that go along with IEP goals, either the updated goal pages or the report cards, just making sure the teachers are getting those out for that last quarter of the year before they head off to some summer vacation. All right, so just a few tidbits there of end of the year things to clean up in terms of procedures. Okay. This next one, I guess this next agenda item, kind of 2 purposes. One, just to let you know something that we're going to be planning, and then also open it up for some feedback on potentially what this opportunity might look like. We are looking at developing a special education teacher training that would be IEP and other special ed procedures for veterans. Okay, we traditionally each year in August we have what we just call our IEP trainings. The target audience for those courses are typically new teachers and new AA staff. So it's the basics, it's the beginning. But we've had some discussions that it would be valuable for there to be some opportunities for veteran teachers to have some coursework opportunities to perhaps brush up on their IEP skills and different topics that go along with special education. And so that need that's been floating out there, it could just be for your special education teachers that want to be continuous learners and keep current. It also could be if you had a special education teacher that was maybe struggling in this area, following the correct procedures and addressing all the things that need to be, they could also participate in this. So it would be something for not new teachers, but veterans. And we've talked as an AA admin team a little bit what would the format be like? How would this work best? And we were reminded that a few years back we had something like this, but we actually called it an IEP refresher course, and it was kind of a one-day wonder event in the middle of the year, and it was primarily for veterans to come and sharpen your skills. And it was well received, and it was good information, but the struggle was, this issue of how much can you cover in one day? How much can participants tolerate in one day? Is there a better way to do it? So right now we're thinking of either a virtual or maybe a blended model. And one model we're thinking about is using Zoom video conferencing. It could be something like we would put together a course, but we would have a series of electronic meetings throughout the year, maybe one a month, maybe at the end of the day, with different topics. And we could package that together as a course and even offer it for credit for folks that would help. But it could also be used flexibly. It could also be, some people might want to attend all and take it as a license renewal class. Others may want to come for certain topics. They might say, hey, I'm not taking this course every month, but I'd like to come on that session where they're talking about goal writing. It could be flexible like that. So that's kind of what we're thinking. And we partly just wanted to let you know that you'll be seeing something like that being offered in the coming year. So, across the 18-19 school year. And then you can see some things in the agenda here on the right. Some of these are just comments that came from chat, thoughts for the folks that participated in the morning. And on the left here are just potential topics here that people kind of brainstormed. Here are some things we might cover, as far as content for a veterans class. So let me just open that up. Any thoughts about that? Any thoughts, recommendations for a course like this that we are trying to develop? If someone wants to watch chat and catch anything in there, that would be appreciated. Quiet out there in Zoom land.
Ron, I was wondering too about just thinking about the IEP and being able to communicate with folks, parents in particular, and getting kids involved and helping them lead their own IEP meetings. That happens some places. That's a real big push and an expectation. In other places it isn't. But I think as teachers become more familiar with the process, our veteran teachers, that might be something that they would like to focus on. And then I think also thinking about when, if it's let's say it's a reading goal that a student has, when would that student be exited, and really focusing on when a student is exited.
Yeah, so decision making for exit decisions, can be a challenge for sure.
So from chat, Ron, Lori, thank you for offering this. Offering this as on a monthly basis rather than a full day. So allowing for practice and feedback would be a good idea. And thanks, Lorna. She thinks also it'd be a good idea, and she thinks SPED teachers don't always get PD focused on their needs and learning specifically. So spreading it out more than one day is a good idea.
Yeah, great.
Ron, I think you've got the last one as well.
All right, very good. This last item is mostly just information sharing, but we did have some questions from the field about this. What this topic is, I think primarily building principals would have received probably more than one email with this information, and it just caused some questions. But what this is about is a parental involvement survey, which is data in this area is an IDA requirement. So we know that Iowa is required to report in some way on this concept of family engagement, and this is for students with IEP. So this idea of our families being engaged in the process, and that is one of those indicators that Iowa is supposed to look at and monitor over time. That's been collected in different ways over the year. In the past, it's been more of a survey through the iStar system. This year, it's a little bit different. It's kind of a very large scale but brief survey. And you can see the links that you have here. There's a survey overview and there's a parent letter in English and Spanish. I'll just click on the overview and pull that up. And this is a survey, and who is it going to? The intent is for it to be available to all families, not just families with students that have IEPs or disabilities. So building principals and administrators are asked to provide all parents, students with and without IEPs, this information, this link, and an opportunity to take the survey. And as you can see on screen here, it's short and to the point. It really is, and that's probably a good thing. So you can see these are literally the only questions. How old was your child on January 1st, 2018? It asks about race or ethnicity. They're wanting to track this information using that demographic. Does your child have an IEP? Yes or no? And then the last question, did the school your child is currently attending facilitate, request, encourage, or initiate your involvement as a means of improving services and results for your child? So yes or no. So it's really that simple. The intent is to, please share this widely with all of your families. The way the survey is set up, we've been told, is that from the same device or computer, someone could respond up to 5 times. So that, after you answer the questions, thinking about child number 1, if you've got other children in your family, the parent could click a button and say, I want to do another one, and they could respond for each of their children. I think up to 5 is how they've limited it. But so yeah, the survey is open now. It was open from March 26th until June 30th. So a pretty big window there. But the Department of Ed has asked that you share this with families no later than April 30th. Just the idea of giving people time to hopefully respond. A principal asked me the other day, well, how does anybody know that if we did this? Or I think the answer is they don't. I mean, you can see they're not collecting. And I'm not sure of the reasoning for that choice, but they're not collecting this data by district. They're just collecting it overall from the state. So the main point is to try to get a really, really nice response rate and just some real basic data from a lot of families and kind of see what that looks like. So questions on that? Just it's there. Building principals are asked to get the word out, and the DE did provide the letter format in Spanish, which is helpful for some of your Spanish-speaking families.
Thanks, Ron, for bringing that to our attention. Not all of us are in the principal role, but we generally connect with them periodically. So maybe helping them remember to try to meet this requirement is a good idea. So at the bottom of this agenda, I wanted to draw your attention to there are dates set for next year. August 30th, November 28th, February 14th, April 18th. And I believe that Dr. Van Horn will be sending out calendar invites. And what we've done in the past is we've met face-to-face on the very first meeting. And the question was asked this morning, are we going to continue that format? We don't know for sure. I anticipate that we will, unless we hear from the field that they would prefer that the format changed in some way. So I believe he's also going to try to send out a question to you about that as well. And then someone has their cursor right there on the link. There is a survey there, and if you could complete that survey here just in the next few minutes, that would be very, very helpful. We do take a look at that information and try to modify our presentation as much as possible to try to meet your needs. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us today. If you have further questions, please reach out to any regional administrator or Dr. Van Horn. He was under the weather and not able to join us this afternoon. And I want to thank you for being there for kids all the way through this year. And to remind you, the best thing about May is that it ends. So, because between now and the end of May, we're going to hopefully find some spring and some summer. You're going to have all kinds of concerts and end of the year award systems and things like that. So keep it going. I remember that little girl trying to jump up on that, I don't know, table or whatever it was. She just kept trying. So tomorrow we get to keep trying as well. Thank you all so much. Have a blessed day.